Good evening. Glad to have you joining us. This is our third installment of Activate Worcester. We've had some very, very interesting input from folks over the last couple of weeks, and we encourage you to do the same. www.ACTIVATEworcester, that's our website. Go on it, click on it, we have a link. Whatever you want to say about the show, please feel free to do so. Positive and not so positive. We're big boys, and hopefully we'll develop something that's even better as the days go on. A couple things that came out of some of the emails that we've had is that people in general seem to like the show, they like the format. One was, Ron, lose the tie, so your wish is my command, no tie. And finally, stay on point and don't drift. And that's what we'll try to do, particularly in light of the types of guests that we're going to be having now and in the future. There's an awful lot that these folks have to say. And again, our objective is to educate people, illuminate, and get you active in certain areas. And that'll be summarized at the end of every show with a kind of an action plan based on what you hear from the guest. And let's just kick it off. What I have to do next is to introduce my very, very able co-host, Sandy Williamson. And Sandy, again, is back from California and back from Georgia. And we've flown him at big bucks to get him here, as usual. But he's worth every penny of it, right?
Yeah, thanks, Ron.
Oh, you got it.
So,
who's our guest today?
Our guest today is someone that probably a lot of folks already know, Brad Wyatt. Brad is a native of Worcester County. He's married, has 2 children, and he was a graduate of St. John's in Shrewsbury, and then he went off to Carnegie Mellon and got a degree in computer science. Worked at a couple of small companies after Carnegie Mellon. Then he moved his way into Ned Company, known as New England Diamond Corporation, which was a Worcester company and manufactured diamond blades for back in the 60s and up until 2007 when Brad sold the company. He now has his own company, Wyatt Development, LLC, and he owns the Osgood Bradley building, which I'm sure a lot of folks know what that is and where it is, just right next to Union Station. Past president of the Rotary Club, and also unknown to me, even though I've known him for a few years now, he's quite a chess player. He was a champion player back in maybe the late 90s and early 2000s. And he's now chairman of the Boylston School Committee. So, he's still got his hand in chess. He's a volunteer at the elementary school where his children go. So.
Well, you also have a background in Boylston?
Yes.
School committee?
Yeah, I grew up in West Boylston, and about 7 years ago, just like my grandfather did back in 1954, he built his own house. I figured I'd be my own general contractor, so I found a plot of land and I built a house in Boylston. Been living there ever since, and I got so much junk in that house right now I can't imagine moving.
That's great.
So.
Well, thank you so much for having me tonight.
Yeah.
Very glad to come and talk about some of my experiences growing up in Worcester County and on the business side with New England Diamond, and give a shout out to all the former employees we had there. It was a family type company. We all thought we were a family together and worked together well for over 40 years.
You had over 100 employees or so?
Yeah, at one point in the year 2000, we had 119 employees in 6 states and did almost $20 million a year in revenue, which was great. It was phenomenal. We had some big customers. We sold stuff all around the world, and it was wonderful to see that type of revenue coming back into the city of Worcester. Loved it.
So what does it take to make that happen again?
I don't know. It was pretty hard to set up. I mean, it took 30 years to get that far, and then another 10 running the business. You've got to have profit, and to have profit in a company, a lot of things have to go right. And in the city of Worcester, there's some things moving in the right direction and some things moving in the wrong direction. But we do, I believe, need to get a manufacturing base back in Massachusetts.
One of the things you keep hearing is that we need to create jobs. Well, that's a lot more easily said than done. And one of the catalysts to making that happen is small businesses. And I believe that a small business is categorized as that which has, what, 49 or 50 or less employees. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's sort of how I think about a small business. And I always think about a small business as a sort of a family of people that work together. You basically know everybody in a small business. Everybody knows each other. You can't go out to the bond market for big corporate finance. You know, you're living hand to mouth sometimes. You sacrifice a lot as a business owner in a small business. You do whatever it takes to make sure that you can make the product, sell the product, collect from your customer, and solve any problems.
Wear many hats.
Absolutely, absolutely.
One of the things that we keep hearing is that small businesses are really the #1 employer in the United States. And with the policies that are out there right now, not too many things are conducive towards existing small businesses growing or other entrepreneurs wanting to jump in and become small businesses. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's tough to start a business. Most businesses fail. And so I think it's, urgent almost for the government to try to do whatever it takes to help these small businesses survive, especially in the beginning. And from my point of view, one of the things they can do is just sort of get out of the way and let the organic growth happen. By having so many policies and regulations and different taxes and rules, it really hinders the ability for somebody to be agile and start up a company without having a lawyer on staff, figuring out what you have to do with the Secretary of State, figuring out how to set up payroll and all your payroll costs for unemployment insurance, not to mention workers' comp. And then in Massachusetts, you have huge energy costs, huge health care costs. It definitely puts a stranglehold and makes you think twice before you start a business.
Sounds encouraging, doesn't it? One of the things that came out literally this week is that Massachusetts, as a state, has gone from being either #6 or #8, I forget which one.
I think it was 6.
Was it 6?
Yeah.
It is now, I believe it's number 28. So in other words, rather than going towards #1 and being the most pro-business, it's on its way the other way. Okay. What are some of the things that are currently being utilized at the state level that hurt somebody like you?
Just so many regulations. What I just talked about, the energy costs. When I had looked at my company that I eventually sold to a company in California, I had also looked at selling it to a company in Georgia, and they looked at our energy costs and could not fathom how high they were in this state compared to Georgia. And, they had originally planned, if they bought us, to keep us open and manufacture stuff here, but after seeing the energy costs, along with the high health care costs, they realized that wasn't even feasible. And then at the end of the day, we ended up selling it out to a California company that ran the company for about a year and then sold off our equipment, and we just became a distribution firm. There's just so many different forms that come in that kill you. And I just got my property tax bill, too, which is another wonderful day. You work hard to try and break even, and then you get a large property tax bill. It just hurts a little.
It's a beautiful thing. You're sharing the wealth, though. It's got to feel good.
Yeah, John F. Kennedy, he said that, it's a paradoxical truth in 1962 that we have high tax rates and low tax revenues, and we need to cut rates so that we can not have a budget deficit, but to get surplus revenues. And I believe that. I don't know what type of economics you call that, but I think if you lower tax rates, I think you'll see more business. I think before they went to a dual tax rate, I think Worcester was more prosperous with businesses. And when you have that money flowing into the businesses from all over the country producing wealth, that money trickles out to different employees to pay for their college educations, to pay for their homes, their mortgages, eating out in the town, the movies. And I think when you take away those jobs by taking away the incentives on the tax side, I think it really creates a lower level of prosperity, even lead toward poverty.
Well, and so often in the public discourse, there's a great deal of confusion between tax rates and taxes. And we hear, oh, we're going to raise taxes or we're going to lower taxes when they're really talking about the rates. But what the important thing is what's the revenue, as you point out. And lower rates draw more business people in. So even though the percentage they may be paying might be lower, the revenue that's cast off to the government actually goes up.
Yeah, I think a bigger pie is better for everybody. I think people who support single rate and low residential rate, I think everybody agrees that we need a bigger pie. And then the question is, how do we get there? And it really shouldn't be pitting in Worcester the commercial rate against the residential rate. We really should be coming together saying, how can we work together to make Worcester the most prosperous city possible? And unfortunately, it never seems to get that message across. Some groups do a great job, Worcester Citizens for Business, the Worcester Research Bureau, of trying to point out some of the issues going on with the dual tax rate. But unfortunately, it's never really stuck to any of the city councilors, not enough to make a real policy change.
From your perspective then, pardon me again, what are some of the reasons that companies A should be staying in Worcester or entertaining coming to Worcester from outside the city limits itself?
Well, when I look at Worcester, I look at some of the huge benefits of Worcester. Number one is the location. You're in the heart of the Commonwealth. You can get to major cities within an hour. CSX has just moved their transportation hub here. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think, we're very centrally located. That should be one of our prime attributes. I think the other things we have going for us is medical research in the educational institutions. I think those two things are wonderful as well. One of the problems with that is a lot of those are nonprofits, which doesn't increase the amount of revenue that comes in from property taxes. And as a business owner, it scares me to know that I have a property that I have to redevelop, and that if I redevelop it, I'll be paying a larger amount of taxes. Whereas if I sell it to a nonprofit, they can redevelop it and not have those taxes. And so it encourages more commercial property to be sold in nonprofits, which actually shrinks the pie. It sort of goes to that expression that there's no such thing in business as constant business. You're either moving up or you're moving down.
That's very true.
And I think we're either moving up or moving down with the policies that the City Council has. And I think the policies that they're choosing are not policies that encourage really strong capital investment, which is what you need.
And the thing of it is, we also have a city that's very livable, that's priced right for people to come in and live. It's also a great place to get educated, as we know. What is it, 11 colleges that are in the confines of the city itself? And unfortunately, many of those who graduate are out the door. In other words, they're not just being educated here and using that as kind of a segue into living and working in the community. They're out of here.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I talk about bringing capital into the city. Well, those kids who graduate, they are capital, and we need to keep that capital here.
Agreed.
And so we've got to create an environment where they want to start up a small business, where they can get a job quickly and easily and stay, and all of a sudden 2 years later be married and have a house and kids and just build on top of that. So somehow we have to find a way for them to have that initial job coming out of college.
Where does that come from? Does that come from the city council? Does it come from the mayor's office, the city manager, or people getting involved at the local level?
I think a lot of this is at the local level. I think you've got to create an environment. I think the city needs a champion, a hero, somebody to come out and say, we're going to do whatever it takes to attract and keep capital in the city, capital investment. We'll find a way to not do excise tax or give a deduction on that. We'll find a way to give people incentives to upgrade their homes without charging them more on property tax. We'll do whatever it takes to attract capital. And I think if you attract the capital, you'll soon be attracting the kids and the intellectual capital. You'll have more jobs here. And it'll be the Worcester that I remember growing up. I love Worcester. I grew up here. I'm a Worcester kid. I remember going to Dream Machine, walking down Midtown Mall, all that stuff, going to the Showcase North. And I want to see Worcester be like that again, and it's difficult.
Does that strong person come from the State House? Does it come from the mayoralty, i.e. a strong mayor, or another direction?
I think it has to come somewhere politically, probably from like a strong mayor or from a strong city council voice on there that's able to get a majority of people behind them, so that instead of going for the short-term political victory, you go for the long-term city victory. I think right now, a lot of city councilors, they're more concerned about the next election rather than what's best for the city in the long term. And I hate to call them out like that, but that's the way I see it. If you really cared about the city long term, you'd find a way to attract that capital and make an even playing field for everybody. Instead, I see that they really just pander to votes, whether it's one group or another group, so they can get reelected and retire 20 years later with health care for life.
Some folks say that term limits might be the answer to that. Other people say you don't need to enforce term limits. What you really need is an electorate that gets involved, knows the issues, recognizes what people are doing, other than just their campaign promises, and then votes with their feet at the election booth, and we get more than 20% that show up. And I'm talking about at the local level. Obviously, with the big election coming up in November, all sorts of folks are going to show up. You have a Senate race, you have a presidential race, etc. But last November, we had a huge, huge election. And as we've said on this program before, 4 out of 5 who are registered to vote chose to not vote at all.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's why I'm sitting here today. I believe we need to activate Worcester. We need to make sure the people in this city understand the issues, understand that a lot of these politicians are nice guys, but we really need somebody who's going to stand up for the long-term prosperity of the city. And I guess you hit that point in time when you say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I hope those people, you know, instead of leaving and going to Florida, jump on the website to Activate Worcester and figure out a way they can get involved so we can actually research candidates, figure out where they stand on the issues, and elect the people that will best take the city to the next level.
I think there's a sense, how do I best express this, that those who are in power politically, regardless of political persuasion, party, and all that sort of thing, are just very isolated from the electorate. And unfortunately, they're able to do their own thing based on their own personal agendas. And the people who are paying the freight, the taxpayer, is left with nothing but a bill to pay. It's like paying for your meal and not getting very much for it.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect there. I really do. I think that's one of the reasons why they have a tax classification hearing, and then 6 months later, they actually have the setting of the property tax rates, or the budget. So they separate them by 6 months so people sort of don't connect the two. There's a disconnect. You know,
That's classic in every type of taxation that we have in the U.S.,
yeah.
except the possible exception of the sales tax where there's a direct connection. If nobody can really tell
yeah.
how much they're paying or what they're getting for it in any level of tax. I mean, maybe the property tax you can associate at least city services with what you're paying, but you're right, that offsetting, what intentional or not, distracts people, and then they lose track of what's going on.
Yeah, sadly, I pay over $80,000 a year in taxes for my building, but yet I don't have a single vote on the city council because I live over by Great Brook Valley right on the other side of the line. So I don't even have a voice. My voice is here on television and talking with people and letting them know we need jobs, we need prosperity, and we need somebody to really step up. And I have no idea who that person is going to be, but we need somebody.
Well, one of the things that Brad was nice enough to prepare for us, I'll call it a cheat sheet, just certain issues that the small businessman has to deal with. And they're dealing with things like unemployment insurance, which can be huge, paperwork and fees such as payroll taxes, vehicle charges, building safety permits, elevators. Does anybody know what the elevator fee is? It's incredible. LLC paperwork, annual tax filings, and local property taxes. And these are just a few that I'm reading off a piece of paper right now. There are many, many others. In addition to finding an affordable location, in addition, which is not easy, in addition to trying to get finances in place to begin with, because your objective in business is to stay in business first, and then maybe make a profit as well. Yeah. Although that's not considered very, very trendy nowadays, making profits. But putting that all together, how do you encourage entrepreneurs who want to come into the city, do some things, despite all these hurdles? Why should they do it? Why should they put their houses on the line, assuming the house is not underwater, to access capital? Why should they do that?
Because they got to believe in what they're doing. You know, if an entrepreneur believes in what his idea is, then, you know, by all means, go for it. And you've got to ask yourself, is Worcester the right place for that? And it really depends what the idea that entrepreneur has. Mm-hmm. Some ideas, if you talk to people, you could do it over in Shrewsbury where your tax rate is a little less than half of what it is here. That's a huge savings. And when you're starting out, every nickel really, really helps.
Sure. Indeed.
You know. But on the other hand, Worcester has so many wonderful opportunities. You've got the college, maybe you can sell stuff to the colleges on an entrepreneurial scale. I'm not really sure. But there are also resources. You know, Phil Needry in the Economic Development Center, they're there. They're helpful. When I have a problem with the elevators, I can call Phil up, or even Mike Lanava in the mayor's office, and he'll get on it and figure out what we can do to try to help. So there are resources there. But in general, I just wish the government would take their hands off and let people run their business.
Do you find City Hall is responsive?
It depends what it is. I'm still waiting for my abatement request, if you're watching. I hope he's not laughing.
Got it. Yeah, the abatements are a whole separate subject, and we could do a show just on abatements alone. But you've had some rather interesting upgrades in your tax bill.
Yeah, I definitely have. You know, 2 years ago, I bought the other half of the building. We had an independent appraiser come, and it was very solid because I needed a number to buy out my old business partner. And so we had reached a number of $1.2 million, and it was a reasonable number, and we both agreed on it. And then 2 years later, with an emptier building and an elevator that doesn't work, for the city to come in and say it's worth $3 million, and my taxes to jump from about $40,000 to $80-something thousand, that's crazy. I understand that they have a system and a process, and I'm following that system and the process. And I would normally say cautiously optimistic, but I don't know. I'm a little pessimistic that I'm going to find justice here, and I may have to, like many other people, probably take it to the state level to see if we can get an abatement.
What do they base this on?
They base it on your estimated income. They say that your building is this many square feet, you should get this much in rent revenue, so this is how much you owe, and we'll give you a vacancy discount of 20%, and that's the max they can give. Evidently, they must not drive up and down Main Street and see all the empty buildings, because I think the vacancy levels are a lot more than 20%, and certainly in my building.
So is there any data on that?
Yeah.
What the actual occupancy rates are on similar buildings in Worcester?
I don't know. I don't think they're using any data on it. I think they just have a number from the state that they're allowed to use, or so they claim. I'm not an expert in the law, and this gets into another entrepreneurial thing. You know, I should be spending my time with my customers solving their problems, not grabbing papers and reading Mass General Law, trying to figure out how the abatement process works.
To try to stay alive.
Exactly, just to keep afloat.
You've been in the area for quite a while. Can you think of any, let's say, any success stories over the past couple of years in a tough economic environment? New companies coming in, new businesses coming in, entrepreneurial types who've made it work despite all these things.
Oh, absolutely. There are some tech companies with a lot of low overheads. I think they seem to thrive because they don't have a lot of the high-end, high cost of living type stuff that you need. So some of those tech companies that I have friends who work for, they've done fine.
One thing we've seen and visited are a number of restaurants that have come into the city and have rejuvenated it. For example, Shrewsbury Street years and years ago, you know, was strictly an ethnic enclave with Italian restaurants, and that's it. And that's expanded. Down around Green Street, Water Street, areas like that, which were really dying for quite a while, there's been a big resurgence down there, and I see some very positive things happening there. Main South, same thing. So there's a lot of very, very positive things that are happening in the city. And one of the things that I hope we can address as long as this show is on the air is the inferiority complex that the city seems to have. This is a city that the glass always seems to be half empty rather than half full. And I look at a city that's comparable in size, Providence, and you know, they've got lots of problems down there. But nonetheless, they've been on the move for the last 10, 15, 20 years, and there's no reason why Worcester shouldn't be able to do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of local business groups. I mean, you've got the Worcester Chamber of Commerce, but then you've also got, you know, the Chandler Street Business Association and the one I'm familiar with, the Canal District. In the Canal District, there's a new restaurant, Gumbo's, that opened.
Sure.
There's a smokestack. There's so many nice things down there. And they've got Canal Fest coming up in September, probably around the weekend, September 15th. Should have a big sign on my building for that coming up soon. But there's a lot of good things. I think when you go hyper-local into the neighborhoods and some of those neighborhood business associations, they make sure that those things go well.
I'm part of the Worcester Executive Association. We meet weekly. And I can tell you that the mood, and this is roughly 40 to 50 people that attend every week, the mood is pretty upbeat with this group. There are things happening. But yet, you know, the drumbeat in the paper is always, you know, let's grab a bad story and let's just, you know, trumpet that from the highest possible point. And that's unfortunate because it feeds on itself. It really and truly does.
Yeah, I'm optimistic for the city. That's why I'm still here. If not, I would have sold my building and left. I think it has a huge potential. And I think we just need to make sure we're going up and we're not going down. And I think, like I said, that starts politically somewhere on the city council lines to just say we're going to do whatever it takes to attract capital and keep our students here after they graduate.
That's great. One of the things that we're planning to implement in every one of our shows, at the conclusion of the show, and I believe I alluded to this early on, at the conclusion of the show we'll be talking about action steps that you, the viewer, can get involved with based on what you've heard from the guest. And Brad was nice enough to put together some of those for us, and perhaps our friend Sandy will review them. So
I think there were 4 things on the list that really all relate to Activate Worcester, I think. And the first thing you talked about was getting informed. Can you give us a...
Yeah, sure. I think that, you know, we have these local elections, and I think that's where we can make the biggest impact, especially when you have 10% of the population voting. And I think it's urgent for people to really research the candidates and get out and vote. If you don't vote, then your opinion doesn't matter, and you can throw stuff at the TV. So go out, get informed, and try to vote for those candidates that are going to put the long-term prosperity of the city before just the short-term getting elected.
And do the work and find out who these folks are, not just a pretty face.
Absolutely. If you're running for a local office, you should be able to call them up and email them and get a good response.
There's not too many pretty faces there either, but that's another story.
And then there's just the economics, the pension situation, and I don't know how many.
Yeah, you know, the other day I read something that the pension system in Worcester had a huge shortfall, and that sort of scares me a little bit because I'm a business owner, I'm very fiscally responsible, and I want to make sure that, you know, I can pay my bills. And I realize that the city is eventually going to have to find a way to replace that money, and the most likely source is the property tax owner.
Right.
And so that scares me and perhaps other people from making capital investment.
So how do we find that champion?
I don't know. I think go to Activate Worcester and hopefully the cream will rise to the crop.
There's certainly plenty of folks there that will help direct people to areas where they can put their energy in.
And actually be very effective as well.
And again, ACTIVATEworcester.com. You've seen it. It's been on the crawl during the show. Please utilize it, and I thank you for watching. And I look forward to seeing you again next week, and we'll have another very, very strong guest who I think you'll find very provocative and informative.
And thanks, Brad.
Thank you
for having me on, Ron.
Love having you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.